Hey everybody, you're listening to Smoke Meat. I'm your host, Brad Pittman. Smoke Meat's brought to you by Joe's Underground at the corner of 8th and Broad in Augusta, Georgia, down in the bottom of the Lamar Building. Such a great place. I love Joe's. Great food, great people, just great times. They treat you like family from the first time you're in there. Jeremy and the gang know how to treat folks. Remember, I goes to Joe's and so should you. That's down at the corner of 8th and Broad in Augusta, Georgia, in the bottom of the Lamar Building. Today, my guest is Travis Brown. He is the inventor of PodDecks. For those of you that have been living under a rock and don't know, PodDecks is some decks cards that he has made that have podcast ideas. He's got different decks. He's got an episode deck, an interview deck. Actually, has a couple of interview decks with good questions because a lot of times it's just hard to come up with things. And these just kind of help spice things up, you know. And I think it's a great tool for podcasters. I'm looking forward to using them and give him a check out. But we're going to give this a shot now. Have a good talk with Travis here on Smoke Meat. So how you doing today, Travis?
I am out here living the dream. It's a sunny day in Chicago, so I'm optimistic today.
Nice. Yeah, it's not been bad here. A little overcast here, but it's nice and cool, and I'm digging it. It's not pouring rain, so I'm happy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got you on today to talk about PodDecks, man. Being a podcaster, you know, when I first started, I just interviewed a couple of friends, and then I did a lot of solo episodes, and it's funny how hard it is to come up with ideas to do. And, you know, you want to keep current and keep an episode up at least once a week, if not a little more. It gets tough, and I was looking at PodDecks. I'm like, man, this is amazing. You know, why hadn't anybody thought of this before?
Yeah, so I always tell people it's very easy to start a podcast. It's more difficult to remain consistent as a podcaster. And this business was actually started as an accident, as I have a podcast editing agency where I work with coaches and authors and entrepreneurs where I actually edit their podcast for them. We basically do the dirty work, right? They get to do the fun part, which is have the interview, and then they have this virtual assistant team that does everything in the background. Well, I meet a lot of podcasters who just don't have the resources to hire an editing agency. So I wanted to create something where I could still help them. So I made this course called Shortcut to Podcasting, and it was just all of everything I've learned in the last, 8 years of podcasting sort of distilled into the only thing you need to know to really get yourself going podcasting. And so through that, I wanted to send anybody who bought it like a fun little appreciation gift. There's sort of a strategy called sending somebody a lumpy envelope. And if you send somebody something in a lumpy envelope, when they get their mail, it's the first thing they open. And if you're giving them a gift, it's sort of like you surprise and delight them. So I made these decks of cards with questions on them to send to people who bought my course as like a thank you and like a fun surprise. Well, I launched my course, and there's a million courses on how to start a podcast. Nobody wanted my course, but people kept asking me, what are these cards? What are these? I see these decks of cards. What are these cards? And so I was like, maybe this is something that people actually need. And here we are today where I'm shipping PodDecks all over the world. So it just proves that sometimes your initial idea isn't the idea that is your quote big idea.
Yeah, it's funny how things evolve, you know. Like I said, when I started this, I started interviewing a friend of mine, and we were actually sitting in my garage, and I've got my studio set up in the basement, and you know, I talked to so many people I never thought that I would talk to. You know, I've got, you know, I like I told you a while ago, I just interviewed Fred Schneider from the B-52s. You know, I grew up listening to them.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And you know, a year ago, I'd have never thought that I would be able to talk to them, let alone sit and just actually have a conversation. And, you know, I know right now, everybody and their brother, it seems like, is putting up a podcast. And like I said, there's so many courses out there. I can say the word now. I have 30 of them on my Facebook feed all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And they're all the same thing.
Yeah, so that's the other problem is that it's very easy to start a podcast and it's a little more difficult to stand out from the crowd. So something like pod decks is a really fun tool you can use. And if you don't know what pod decks are and you're listening, I should probably explain what they are. They're decks of cards with unique interview questions to get you to have deeper conversations. So these questions were specifically curated to incite meaningful conversations. And the way that you have really great interviews, if you're a podcaster, is you have some level of vulnerability, right? So when you ask a really deep question, a person has to decide whether what they're going to share. And typically, the more vulnerable they get on your podcast, the more interesting your episode is. So some people use these questions as like a game on their podcast. Some people use it to actually plan out their podcast interview to have interesting questions. I like to just go on Instagram Live or Facebook Live and just go live and say, hey, I'll interview anybody who wants to join this live. And I'll meet someone. I'll ask them some questions. I get to know them. I've made so many new friends, especially during these crazy times in quarantine where you can't go anywhere or actually interview someone. You could just get on, and then, you know, my skills as an interviewer have just completely sharpened. I could sit down with anybody without these decks of cards now and have like super meaningful, deep conversations that when I leave that person, they have a really great feeling about me because I was genuinely interested in them, and it makes for a great podcast.
It does. You know, when I first started, I followed the herd and kind of used my radio voice. You know, if you'd have done this with me in July, I would have been like, so today we have Travis Brown. Travis, tell us a little bit about your product. And now, you know, this doesn't sound much different than when we talked on the phone a while ago. You know, it's just two guys talking, and it works.
That's right. Well, I gotta say, you got a great voice. First of all, you have a great natural voice. I do like your radio voice, but I like the fact that you are being. So one of the things I love about any podcast is authenticity. So I like that you're being your authentic self with me. You're not putting on a radio voice or being something you're not, which is something I think is really cool about podcasts, is that like we get to share stories and be who we are and share who we are. So you could kind of smell out like a fake, like a podcaster who's trying too hard, and then versus somebody who's having like being their authentic self. So I appreciate that you've pivoted to your authentic self.
Yeah, you know, when you talk about the vulnerability a while ago, you know, and I'm an open book. You know, I would be extremely hard to blackmail, and you know, some of the conversations that me and my guests have, you know, I had somebody ask me a while back, you know, why do you call your podcast Smoked Meat? What is that? You know, obviously I smoke a lot of different kind of meats, but the reason why the name is so near and dear to me, and I've told this story before, and I'll probably tell it 100 more times on here, is, you know, I'm a full-time paramedic. I just hit 30 years, and 5 years ago when I was on the ambulance, I had 2 strokes.
Wow.
And yeah, it didn't get me physically, but it scrambled my eggs really good. It left me with a stutter. It left me with holes in my memory. I cried a lot. Just a lot of different things that brought up a lot of PTSD having to sit at home and not work. And I've got a good friend who loves to hunt and has a lot of land and hunts all the time, but he doesn't like wild meat. So he would kill something. He would call me and my other friend who was really close with me at the time, and we're still what I call, I've never had a ride or die, but he has been one for 40 years. And he would call us and say, hey, I got a deer, come get it. So we'd go get it, and we'd, you know, process it because it gets expensive having to pay to process them.
Yeah.
And I learned how to do that, and he would shoot hogs. I learned how to process those, and we would make hamburger and roast, that kind of thing. And I got tired of doing that part. I said, you can only have so much hamburger and roast. So I learned how to make all kind of different sausages. I do a venison pastrami that is amazing.
Wow. Sounds good.
And that helped me heal. And, you know, I kind of pay homage to that and respect to that by using that name.
That's awesome.
And you know, things like that. Like I say, I'm an open book. I've never done anything I'm ashamed of. I've done a lot of things I probably should be ashamed of, but you know, it's what makes you is your flaws.
Absolutely.
And I've been told several times I've got a very soothing voice. I mean, it's the one I've always used. I've done one without this voice, and it was awesome. I did my imitation of Herbert the Pervert from Family Guy reading the Three Little Pigs.
That's awesome.
It was a very, very different show, let me tell you. Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of podcasting, though, is that, there's no rules. I always tell people, there's no rules in podcasting. You can do whatever you want, but a lot of people like to follow the leader, or they think, I work with a lot of clients who think that like any little background noise, like my dog barked, I got to get that out of there. And I'm like, well, what if people love dogs and they find out that you have a dog? Maybe they'll like you more. They'll have more of a connection with you.
Yeah, that gives it flavor.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's, of course, the beauty of audio is also that it's subjective. Some piece of music I could think is like revolutionary and life-changing, and you could think, I don't really care for that one. And vice versa. There could be a song that you think is just like the soundtrack of your life, and I could be like, it just doesn't do it for me. And the same, I think, goes for podcasting. So I love podcasting as a medium because I just think it's freeing, and everybody has a different story. Like, you just shared that story about the strokes on the ambulance, and like no one else has that story. Like, that's your story. So it's a great way to share your story.
Yeah, and I'm in a lot of different groups on Facebook and Twitter and all that deal with podcasting, and people come on asking for advice, and there's always that one or two people in the group who come on, well, you've got to do this way, you've got to do this, and I'll tell them when they ask for advice, I always put, have fun, it's your show. Like I say, there are no rules. I can go 5 minutes or I can go 3 hours. I don't care. It's whatever happens, and that's the
correct.
fun part of it.
Exactly. Yeah. People put too many restrictions on, like, if you're trying to have a half an hour show, but you've only got 10 minutes of good content, well, you really got a 10-minute show. Why stretch it out to make it 30 minutes? So, I don't judge, because I know that everybody starts in a different place. And that's part of, the reason I created Poddex was to give people a tool to help them grow and hone in on their voice. Because your first 25 to 50 episodes are going to, that's where you're learning, like, you don't just come, I mean, some people have a background in broadcast, so they come out and they're like a little more polished, but like, you got to give yourself a chance. And by having a tool in your toolbox that allows you to, pretty much have a good question at any point in time is really good to have. And I've seen a lot of podcasters do something, and I don't have a name for it yet, but basically what they're doing is they ask a question to their guest. And while their guest is answering that question, they're trying to figure out what they're going to ask next. And they're not listening to the answer to the question that they just asked. So the conversation has immediately become less connected, because the other person is just freaking out, thinking like, what am I going to ask next? What am I going to pivot? They're processing. They're not having an actual conversation.
Yeah.
So I just think it's a lot of fun, and there's nothing out there like it. And it's been a fun journey meeting and helping podcasters.
Yeah, and everybody thinks it's a competition, and like I say, it's not. Anybody I can help. People ask about podcast gear, and I mean, I'm the cheapest guy in the world, and I understand wanting to save money, and at the same time, if you buy cheap, you're going to sound cheap. I mean, that's just the reality of audio a lot of times, unless you want to edit it to death, and then if you're buying cheap, you probably can't afford somebody to edit for you, so it is what it is. Like I push the Rode PodMic, because for me, when I was on the radio, we had $1,000, really, really nice mics, and this thing, I'd put it up against it any day of the week.
Yeah.
And I can share that with other people who, may be about to, well, I saw this on Wish that I can get a mic and an arm and everything for $40. Or you could spend $60 more and get a really good mic and be happy with it, instead of that one that you're going to say, why did I buy this?
Yeah, well, I've got a saying, you buy cheap, you buy twice. So unfortunately, some people have to learn that lesson, and I understand. Podcasting is it's free. So when you make a podcast, you don't make money on it. So it's hard for some people to justify purchasing a $100 microphone. And I think the other thing that lives within that is sort of fear. Like, what if I don't, if I buy this $100 microphone and I don't do it, then they'll feel guilty about spending that money. But, the internet's full of people asking the same question every day. Which is the best podcast mic? And in reality, I mean, a dynamic microphone, any of the dynamic microphones that are between 40 and $100 will do just fine. You just gotta, it's like any other tool. You get it, you figure out how to use it the best for you, and then your content really is what's key. I mean, I've heard some really, excuse my language, crappy podcast audio, but the message was so compelling that it didn't matter. I mean, like, there's Gary Vaynerchuk. I always knock on him. I love Gary Vaynerchuk, but his podcast sounds like total crap because he's in the back of a car on earbuds, and it's not even a real microphone, but his message is infectious. I mean, the guy just gets you riled up and ready to take over the world. So it doesn't matter, So, yeah.
Yeah, and everybody thinks, and the one thing I try and tell everybody that wants to talk to me about podcasting, everybody thinks they're gonna get that Rogan deal. And God bless Joe Rogan. He's been doing this since the start. He's earned his money.
Oh yeah.
And he's like the Godfather. I mean, now if somebody if you feel like getting some people together and paying me that much money to be on one network, I will be on that one network. I'm not even gonna sit and lie about it. But everybody thinks they're going to get those numbers right off the bat, and they're not.
Well, he's been consistent for 13 years and released an episode or 3 episodes a week for 13 years. And, I mean, everybody wants to be Rogan because, he's a cool guy. He's enlightened. He's funny. He's got the best guests. But, I mean, you can't expect those results. And there's a lot of people that I help. So I have a private Facebook group called the Poddex Podcast Posse. And I have a lot of people who come in there and they're like, yeah, I want to get more downloads. And I'll be like, well, what's your show about? And they're like, well, it's just about everything. Me and my friends just, kind of kicking it. And it's like, that's cool because it's fun and it's a great thing for you to do. But unfortunately, if people aren't friends with you, they may not get your references, or they may not, it takes time. You have to build the tribe. It takes time. It may take you 13 years, like it did Joe Rogan, to blow up this word of mouth situation. So it's difficult to help them because, if your podcast is about anything and everything, you don't really have a defined audience that you can leverage to grow. So, and I think people are jealous of Joe Rogan. Like $100 million is a lot of money for a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
But hey, I looked a while ago on my Anchor. I'm up to 3207. Oh,
nice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's right. Who's your daddy?
That's right. Well, when when you want to spend that money, you know who to reach out to help you.
Exactly. Okay? Exactly. But it's funny, since I've noticed since I started doing more interviews and just made my style just normal talking, I've grown so much. I went from 50 or 60 hits a month to I'm on track to hit 3,000 this month.
Wow, congratulations.
And that's pretty cool. I mean, the audience size still isn't huge, but it's consistent, and I like that. And
that's amazing. Yeah. I think a lot of people starting out that I talk to, I'll be like, how many downloads are you getting? And they're like, oh, I only get like 100 downloads per episode. And I'm like, could you imagine walking into a room every month where there's 100 people sitting there waiting to hear what you have to say? And they're like, oh yeah, that is sort of a lot of people. I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of people. Like if you went into a room like that, you'd be nervous, like you would actually you'd be scared because, that's a lot of people. So I think for people that are just starting out, like you need to put it into that perspective. And I love the piece about the consistent listeners. Like that's a big deal for podcasting. A lot of people just do what I call the spray and pray marketing method, where they go and they join all these Facebook groups and they just post their episode in everywhere they can. And they think if they make the most noise, that they're going to get the most listeners. But the problem is that, like, you really don't want everyone to listen to your podcast. You really want to say, like, hey, like, my podcast is like for this kind of person. You almost want to be like anti other people. I know that sounds bad in today's times, but you want to say, like, if you think that Joe Rogan sucks, then my podcast is for you. And everybody who thinks Joe Rogan sucks is going to immediately be curious to see what your podcast is about, right? And I don't think that many people think Joe Rogan sucks, but that's just an example, right?
Yeah.
But people go out there and they just start posting everywhere, and it's a total waste of time, because you look like an idiot. You're not getting anything, and you don't want people to just come and listen to one episode and leave. You want people to come and stay for a long time. So it really doesn't matter if you get 1 million downloads one month and then 5 the next, because everybody left because your podcast isn't for them, right? So if you're starting a podcast, don't do the spray and pray method where you just try to post your podcast everywhere, because it absolutely doesn't work. You want to do the opposite of that. You want to find, like, real people. Like, this is another thing people do. They say, I want to get more downloads. And I'm like, no. You want to make more friends. You want to have more friends in your life that listen to your podcast, because a download isn't a human being. And you know who's on the other end of this podcast right now? Is 2 ears that connect to a head, that connects to a brain, and that's a person, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to think like you're serving people by entertaining them with your conversations. So
yeah, and marketing that's one thing that's been a booger for me, because the only way I've been doing it, one, word of mouth, and two, I post on my Facebook page, my Twitter, and my Instagram, but I just post on mine. I don't go 10,000 places and do it, because I figure if you're my friend, you're in these groups anyway. And that's been that took a while to take off, and that's because my friends hear me all the time. They don't really want to hear me in their car. and it's hard to figure out new ways to market that aren't already saturated.
Yeah, so my personal opinion on that is it's a pretty easy method, but it takes a little bit of extra time. So basically what you're going to do is just go to places that you think that your potential listener is, right? So you kind of have to go like, I think that my potential listener's name is Tina, and she's 33, and she likes, Joe Rogan, and her boyfriend's a dick, but she likes podcasts that are kind of, out there, that have different conversations with different kinds of people. And, like, you have to figure out where she goes on the internet. And then you have to go there and become another participant, meaning commenting on posts, liking posts, giving value in groups, like just being a human being. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is if you're smart and you have your podcast in your bio and everything, eventually someone's going to like something that you said enough to go, who is this guy? And they're going to click on your page, or they're going to click on your profile, and that podcast is going to be there. And they might be like, I'm going to check this podcast out, right? Mm-hmm. And so by being, and this is another thing that I'm having people in my group work on, is like, just be a person. Like, you wouldn't walk down the street and meet someone new and immediately go, subscribe, rate, and review my podcast, right? You would go, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? Oh yeah, it's a beautiful day today. Oh yeah, like you like my car? Yeah, I just built it in my garage. What else are you into? Oh, you like podcasts? That's cool. What's your favorite podcast? Oh, I like Mark Maron. Cool, I like Mark Maron too. Like, I actually have a podcast. Oh, you do? You have a podcast? What's it called? Like, you would have a more organic interaction, right? You wouldn't just go like, subscribe to my podcast, please. And that's what people are doing on the internet, and it doesn't work. So you have to pretend you're walking down the street, but the internet is the street, and you're interacting with people and figuring out, like, who do I want to listen to my podcast and who do I not want to listen to my podcast? And where are the people who I want to listen to my podcast hanging out, and then go hang out with them. Does that make sense?
I love that strategy. I've never thought about it like that, and I've seen the old videos where if Facebook was real life, where people just walk up and poke each other and all that.
Yeah.
I've never put that two and two together where, it does make sense. How you doing? My name's Brad. Listen to this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of what people do. And it's funny because, it's like you would like if you told people to go do that, hey, you want more people to listen to your podcast? Just walk up to random people on the street and say, listen to my podcast. They'd be like, absolutely, I'm not doing that. Absolutely not. Right. And the funny thing is that they'll do it online, right? But they won't do it, they won't do it in real life. So like you want to kind of stick to what you do in real life with people on a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Outstanding. Well, now I've got a nice editing question for you because I had something happen to me while I was editing one the other day that threw me for a loop. Now, first off, do you believe in ghosts?
I do.
Are you a follower of EVPs?
I know what an EVP is. I've watched a couple shows like Ghost Hunters and stuff where they review EVPs, so I'm familiar. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I used to do the ghost hunting thing, and I've got a lot of them in the library that I made. And I was editing one the other day, and as you know, I record my intro, then I get my guest, and I start recording from there. I caught an EVP when I started recording.
Cool.
Yeah, I haven't enhanced it yet to see what it says. It sounds like it says, I hear him, but it's not my guest, and she was home alone, and I'm down here in my basement alone, and there was nobody anywhere on either line, and it was really clear. I'm like, holy crap!
Interesting. Which track was it on, yours or your guest?
Well, the way I'm running through my board, I'm going through Audacity, and it mixes it all into one track.
Okay.
So I'm not sure which one it was on.
That's interesting. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. The EVP thing is crazy. And if, it makes a lot of sense to me as somebody who, I sort of believe more in energy than I believe in a man sitting in the clouds in the sky. Like, I think that like, if energy can't be created or destroyed, that when you die, your energy's got to go somewhere. And if energy is like electricity, manipulating that would be probably the first thing you try to do if you were a ghost, right? You'd be like, I'm energy, that's energy. How can I interact with it, right? And that would be an easy way to try to communicate from the dead with a human being, right? Is to try to get on a recorder. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And when I was doing it, the only way to hear your EVPs was, you go through your whole investigation, then you go sit in the office at 2 a.m. when you're done, jacked up from being out ghost hunting, and just sit with headphones and listen to a couple of hours of just total. You don't realize the total gibberish that you and your friends talk until you listen to it. And you don't hear anything real time. But I've got the new recorders out now. I use I think mine's a Tascam D40X. But if I have headphones in, I can hear anything coming into it real time. So I'm kind of wanting to go do it again just to see if I can hear them real time with this recorder.
That's cool.
But yeah, it's funny the technology. I remember when I was on radio doing my ads on reel to reel, and now,
wow.
I mean, if I get bored, I can just like pick up my phone and just start recording, and it's better quality recording than I had then.
Yeah, it's funny how technology leapfrogs like that, isn't it?
I remember when talkies came out. I'm a little old sometimes, but I've always been the oldest person in the room, no matter what age the people were. So.
That's funny.
But yeah.
Well, I do have a pretty fun offer for people, and I don't know if you care if I share it with them on your podcast.
By all means, and I'll put it in my show notes too.
Yeah. So, I'm so passionate about helping people podcast that I have a Poddex deck called the Episode Deck, and it's got 50 unique podcast starting prompts, meaning that like you would just pull a card and it says something to podcast about on there. Now these are non-industry specific podcast starting prompts, so it doesn't matter if you're a banker or a Major League Baseball player or a plumber. Like any of these cards, you could start a podcast. So the reason I made it was because I was tired of missing episodes. Like if your guest canceled or if you just weren't feeling like inspired, or like I would stare at blank pieces of paper and I'm just not really be able to like come up with anything. So I wanted to have this like in my hip pocket where I could just pull a card and spontaneously start podcasting. So I've got these episode decks. I have a limited number, but I want to give them to people who want to start a podcast or have started a podcast and just feel stuck for free. So if you go to free.poddex.com, you can get your very own Poddex episode deck for free. All I ask is that you cover the shipping, because I'm giving you the deck and the envelope and all that stuff. So if you want to get your hands on this, like let's say you're going to start a podcast, or you already have a podcast and just kind of struggling with consistency, I highly recommend checking out. It's a really fun tool to have. So I only have a limited amount, but I've been sharing this for a little while because I feel so passionately about helping people that I charge $19 for this deck on my website. So I want to give it to you for free. So hopefully if someone's listening and they want to start a podcast or already have a podcast, they take me up on this offer.
Outstanding. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to using these things, and you know, I've got an idea for a segment already. And when I mentioned it to you, said that's exactly what these are for. You know, I'm going to call it the Poddex Fast Five, which I'm going to draw five cards out of the question deck, and you know, it's kind of boom, 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 boom. Let's get some quick answers to these.
Rapid fire. Yeah, I love it. I think, and you'll have so much fun. And I think that there's something really, really cool, like about the spontaneity or the unknown of like asking somebody a question that like you don't know that it's coming and they don't know that it's coming, and like it's the Kindle that starts like an amazing conversation. I've had so many conversations where like I intended to go in and talk about X and went totally off the rails because one of these Poddex questions it took us down a rabbit hole of conversation organically, and it's so much fun. And I'm just super excited. Like I'm connected with you right now, and I'm really excited about that because this has opened up a door for me to meet and have conversations with so many people, and that's something that I genuinely really love in life.
Yeah, and that's me. You know, I look at it this way. I interview people who I've had authors on, I've had, you know, actors on, but they haven't done anything in 30 years. But, you know, everybody's got something to offer. And once you figure that out, it's kind of freeing because, well, yeah, they were an actor at this point. They're still a person, and they've got some really cool stories. And
absolutely.
And once you just let things flow, it goes anywhere. I don't remember who it was I was talking to. We were talking about Hollywood or something, and the next thing you know, we're talking about Bigfoot. And it was great. You know, when I interviewed Robert Wuhl, I went on with him, and I was expecting, I had my list of questions I was going to do and just kind of things I was going to touch on, and he pretty much wound up interviewing me, which was really neat. I enjoyed it.
It's, you know, and I think with the internet, the thing that people forget is that, like, being able to have a conversation with anyone is a real skill in life. There's so many people that the internet has, you know, or text messaging has made them completely unable to have a conversation. I mean, I know that there's people out there that they will not answer their phone, but they'll answer a text message because they're so out of the realm of just being able to have a conversation. And communication is like so important for human beings. It's so important for community. It's so important for you as a person to be able to communicate and learn from other people. I mean, if you think way back into the day, what did they do? They had experiences. They told stories and passed those stories down to their sons and their grandchildren and their grandchildren, to where we have these stories that we know, or these parables that we know because somebody told somebody. And you know, it's a big part of humanity is storytelling and conversations.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, I tell you, you know, I feel really good about this conversation. We have had an awesome one today. I've enjoyed it a lot. You know, you're welcome on here anytime.
I love it. Yeah, I had a great time with you, and you know, I'll definitely hit you up to do this again sometime. You sound like a great guy, and I love what you're doing, and I hope that if anyone's listening that's interested in podcasting can take tips from you. And if they want to take me up on my offer, free.poddex.com, that's awesome too. And just remember, like, it's supposed to be fun. So have fun with it, right? Have a good time. It doesn't matter how many downloads you get. It doesn't matter what microphone you have. It matters that you're illuminated by sharing your stories and having a good time.
Exactly. Yep. Just call and say, Fat Boy, I want to talk. And we will hit record.
All right. I'll take you up on that, man.
All right.